here. And he's going to flash that. I'm going to say yes. All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Thursday, September 8th, 2022 Legislative Subcommittee session. We will quickly do a roll call for attendance. Jean, would you please do a
Yes.
roll call for us?
Mayor,
Here.
Assistant Mayor Kelly. Here. Councilor Cook. Here. Councilor Tabor.
Here.
City Manager.
Yes, here.
And I'm here, Jane Farini, Assistant City Attorney.
Thank you, and I hope everybody's enjoyed the summer. Next up on the agenda, we have the approval of the March 28th, 2022 minutes. I would await a motion to approve those.
So moved, Your Honor.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then we have the review and discussion of the New Hampshire Municipal Association's 2023-2024 proposed legislative policy positions and proposed legislative principles in order to present recommendations regarding those policy positions and principles to the City Council. And I guess I would pass it to Jane Farini to highlight any changes. This has been distributed before, but any changes that you would specifically call out?
So I'll first draw your attention to the proposed legislative principles, and that's the one-page document that was sent out. I just have a few little explanations on a few of the points. They haven't varied too dramatically from year to year, similar to what this committee does. In fact, we copied it from the New Hampshire Municipal Association. They adopt these broad principles so that when legislation comes up under these broad principles, they have the ability to, take a position for their membership, which is pretty much most of the cities and towns in New Hampshire, with a few exceptions. So just by way of explanation, because I had to look a few of these things up myself, number one, the Part 1, Article 28A is the provision of the New Hampshire Constitution that says no tax shall be levied without the consent of the people. So that's just obviously we oppose any mandate that would violate the Constitution and the taxing principles set forth therein. The other provision that I would like to bring to your attention is that the revenue sharing in number 2, just by way of background, RSA 31A provides a particular percentage of the general revenue that should be returned to cities and towns, and it gets suspended frequently. And in fact, it was suspended again through June of 2023. So that's why that position is one of those that NHMA opposes, because it doesn't funnel the money to the cities and towns as required by statute. And there are statutes similarly crafted for meals and rooms distribution and particular monies for bridges and water. And let's see, most of these are, self-evident and really need no further explanation. Again, they're broad brushes so that the NHMA can take positions, and I'll answer any questions if there are any questions on the principles 1 through 11.
Any questions?
I guess this is more of less within the council and more within a personal view of some of the things they oppose. The big one, this sounds funny to say, but the big one for me, because I know that there's conversations about it in the state, is the cannabis. So I know that there's some, obviously there's the decriminalization of it to a certain degree in the state of New Hampshire, but then when we look at other states that have, really helped their coffers in cities and municipalities, especially when you look at Elliott and right over the border in those border towns. And I think, it seems to be the way that it's going federally. I would be interested to see, it seems like they're just looking for more legislation that will help funding, so it seems like it's more the distribution of any funding that comes in. Seems to be what they oppose it, from what I was trying to understand.
Yes, and I can explain that a little bit further when we discuss the policy positions.
Perfect.
But I agree,
Yeah.
it's more about, if we're going to allow it, we want to make sure that the state helps fund some of the impacts of allowing it. So you're exactly right, that's how I review their positions as far as what they're trying to
Accomplish within
accomplish
their
by these
proposal.
policies.
Okay.
Yep. But getting back to the legislative principles, I don't think I explained the background so much. NHMA has a policy conference on Friday in September. I think it's the 23rd? 23rd. And a delegate from the city, I think it may be the mayor. Are you able to go to that
23rd, yeah, yes.
on Friday?
Yep.
Votes on behalf of the municipality to support the principles, and then votes or doesn't vote for these other
okay.
policies, and that's why we're going to go through these in more
Okay.
detail. Okay?
Thank you.
So the first order of business would be whether this committee would recommend the legislative principles to the council to approve at the next city council meeting, so that we could then go to the conference and participate in the voting with the membership.
I would move that we approve these.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, is there a discussion?
No,
All in favor?
I,
Any opposed?
Okay, so now we can move on to the more detailed policy positions, which oftentimes, again, are more in detail, and it's the same principle. However, certain topics over the years have been, the subject of interest from the membership. What we typically would do is we'll go topic by topic and see if anyone has any questions on any of these, and if you would recommend to the council to not approve a particular position when the vote is taken at the NHMA conference, then our membership would, do whatever the council ultimately approves for each of these positions. And that's how it's been run over the years. So I think probably just topic by topic might be the best way to
Sure.
to address that. So the local authority and efficiency, obviously, we saw a lot of that last session, right? And that's why this principle is probably number one when they set forth their policy positions. Basically, keeping the integrity of local decisions from the state usurping that. Several of these really only apply to towns. But we saw a lot of legislation on these. So I think that it's clear what they support. They support local autonomy, and they support collaboration in their bills and conceptually. So, and they obviously oppose anything that detracts from local authority. So does anyone have any questions or are not in agreement with any of these provisions under local authority and efficiency? No? So then I guess there would be a motion to recommend to the city council to approve
Why
the,
don't we, I guess one motion would be at the end of this. Let's,
do each one a discussion and then one motion at the end?
Yep.
Okay.
we haven't marked any under local authority and efficiency.
Okay.
So next up, I guess, is right.
Would
to
be
know.
the right to know. This has evolved as well, over the years. These particular policies every year, get further refined as the right to know law gets further refined. And I think this is really just practical application of the right to know law. I know every year there is a request to have sort of an I can never say that word. Ombudsman, to kind of vet and oversee issues relative to right to know rather than going to court. It fails every time, but it's something that NHMA constantly supports to try to clarify and simplify for everyone's benefit, what the process is and how to address the right to know. So are any of those provisions something that this committee would not recommend to the council?
Counselor Tabor as a paper man.
That's right.
I have to contort myself to oppose right to know. I think the only one that I questioned was, that right now we need a quorum in person. And we learned in COVID that that's a limiting factor at times for small committees. I don't know how the rest of you feel about that, but.
So then that would support the last bullet, the authority of a municipality to change that.
Okay, so that we're in
be nice.
agreement with that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And the general flavor of this is that there are costs associated with right to know requests. And that by having some means of charging for that, at least on the reasonable labor costs and other costs responding to illness or excessive record requests, might make our ability to respond to these more, or we'd be more able to respond if we could somehow charge for the cost to our legal department to respond to them. Yeah, I don't have any.
You'd have a problem with that first bullet then?
As long as it's not excessive. I mean, you don't want.
What says not excessive right there? It
Yeah.
says reasonable. Well, I don't know, maybe we could get a outside counsel and start billing at $300 an hour.
Just think about whenever you copy anything at the library, like you ask them to copy something 5 cents a page or whatever,
Right.
it's the same.
Same, yeah.
It's reasonable.
So
Or
next up
for
is
excessive records. Yeah.
elections.
Yep, elections, are there any questions on any of those provisions?
So provision number 1, so that's new, an established, or is that establishment of an independent redistricting commission to draw? Is that in response to the redistricting of last
Yes,
session?
and I think this actually, it may not be the first time this has come up on the subject of redistricting, but NHMA continues to support the redistricting commission, and certainly it was very topical last session, and so it makes sense that they put that as one of the, the primary, or at least the first principle that they would support under general elections.
Yeah, because this will be our first election with the new districting.
Yes.
And as we see, there's reps who would now
Change.
represent
I
3,
know.
4, 5 in Newington, or 2, 3 in Newmarket.
Exactly. It's a challenge. We lost our representative in Ward 5. We were split across Newcastle. So Newcastle and Ward 5, and then so that's a real challenge, right?
Yeah.
Yes. It definitely is a challenge, and, that principle of, it depends on the election, depends on who gets elected, what the composition of the House and Senate is, what comes forward again, But the redistricting doesn't come that often, but I think a commission to work on this on an ongoing basis, would be something that,
Yeah, to see how how it's affected these communities that were split up, and then report back and hopefully.
so I doubt this is the end of that issue.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to labor and employment. Any questions or issues relative to those principles?
What is the definition of an evergreen?
An evergreen is like a automatic rollover or an extension without further action.
Okay.
And they can sneak up on you, and you can have contracts go longer than, it's like automatic renewing particular provisions of a contract. So you definitely don't want that, because you want to know your hard stop date, not have these particular provisions go on and on and on.
But if the municipality and the union can't reach agreement, and there's stalemate, we stay on we're legally required to stay on the original contract, right?
I believe so. I'll defer to the city manager on that.
Sorry. Say that again. I have a kid whose battery died in her car, so I'm multitasking. Say that again.
If there's no contract, do we default to the existing contract? Are we
That is
required
correct.
to
The
pay-
existing contract's in place
fulfill the-
until the, correct.
Right. I always thought that was the evergreen definition.
But it doesn't continue forever. I think it's that creating mandatory evergreen clauses for public employee collective bargaining agreements is something that they oppose, because they do want a hard stop. They do want a point at which,
Right. Things
you
can be-
take the next step, as opposed to continuing forever and ever.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
Just on a personal, I overall think these are good policies. I struggle to oppose anyone's right to strike. That's just a fundamental value.
We can remove that from the recommendation to council if.
I would make that motion.
How do we, I guess, is that a second? We can discuss it.
Second.
Do public employees currently have the right to strike?
I do not know.
I thought they did.
I think we do. I think we would know if we did not. We can get clarification on
I'll
that.
get clarification on that.
Okay. I'm happy to remove it or support that as well, but I believe that they do have the right to. So I guess it would be helpful to know.
Let me see if I can get that clarification right now.
Okay,
Thank you.
so we can, all in favor of removing support of the right to strike for public employees?
I've always felt public employees should not have a right to strike, not to take anything away from the power of collective bargaining, but because public safety sometimes requires that police and fire be on the job.
Yeah.
And teachers is a tricky one, too. So,
I would wonder if there is a clause within their contract which would potentially supersede whether we remove this or not.
I think this is a challenge because some categories of public employees definitely in the past, I feel like have always had that right to strike. I'm thinking particularly of teachers. And I did work as a union teacher member for a year, and we definitely had the right to strike in Pennsylvania. And that was part of the reason that districts were willing to work with you on your new contract, because they didn't want you to strike. They didn't want you to quit working. And that's, I think, part of the benefit to public employees of being part of a union is, in some ways, having that collective power. And you do take some power away from them when you don't. That said, these are just the principles that the New Hampshire Municipal Association is fighting for. They aren't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily change anything. If you ask them to remove that provision, that doesn't mean they're going to go out and be taking a different position on that issue. It just means that they don't have a position on that issue, I think.
Right, and it would be the majority of the members vote. So at the conference, if the majority of members in attendance approve this provision, then notwithstanding those who objected to it or requested that it be removed, the NHMA's position would include it. So that's how it works. It's really the majority vote of the membership when this comes forward at the policy conference.
Okay, so the, I guess in terms of the order of operations, it would be, I don't know if we would remove, so what will happen at this is, I'm trying to remember from last year, Jane, or 2 years ago,
Similar to what we're doing, they call the main
yeah,
topic, and I think, and they asked for a vote of the membership. That was COVID, so there wasn't a lot of robust discussion. It was, sort of very quick and topically, like we're doing. I think if they go point by point, then you would not vote in favor of that particular provision. If they go for the full slate, I think you would mention in the beginning that you would oppose that and clarify whether that prevents you from voting on the whole slate on the topic.
Okay.
Depends on how they present the vote, and I remember it was very different during the COVID.
okay, one time.
Yeah.
So do we have,
We have clarification. I asked the question of the legal team, do public employees currently have the right to strike? And the answer is no, they have the Public Employment Labor Relations Board.
okay, so there's another avenue
Correct.
for,
So if they get to impasse, they mediate
go
through
there.
the
Correct.
Mediate.
Labor Relations Board.
So with that information, I would feel comfortable removing my motion.
Okay. Second is okay with withdrawing
Fine with that, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that information, City Manager.
You're welcome.
All right, moving on to substance use prevention and response. Does anyone have any issues with the principles identified NHMA opposes and supports?
Yes, yes, as I brought up earlier,
Yeah, clearly the opposition to any legislation relative to cannabis seems to really,
harp on funding.
funding and definitely funding for, anticipated costs associated that might be borne by a municipality due to the location of that industry in the municipality.
I'm okay with it.
Anyone have any comments or questions?
Jane, do you see cannabis legislation coming up?
I don't know. I think it depends, again, on the election and if things change. I thought last year was pretty close.
yeah, I mean, I think this is a little ridiculous, and the fire department and EMS agencies are likely to see an increased calls.
For those who overdose of using
Those
cannabis.
abusing cannabis. I mean, that, the lethal dose of cannabis, you'd probably, you'd find it with, you're not going, I don't see that as a reasonable statement to.
I feel like it perpetuates the misinformation, and as we know
Just
through
on
the
the
legal.
couch eating potatoes.
Yeah,
And
as
like-
we know through the other municipalities and states who have legalized it, we do not see an influx of
In
service
fact, we
related.
see a reduction in overdoses of other
Other drugs.
other drugs. And so that's,
And actually, Colorado experienced a reduction in traffic accidents.
And a surplus in a budget.
Well, there was less drinking and more
Yes.
smoking.
So it would be well within this committee's,
I mean, I guess like what they're talking about in, that provisions adequate and sustained funding to municipalities. I just feel like this should be more clarified, that the municipalities should be able to receive, a share of any tax that it is, levied against marijuana or cannabis.
I would also add this opt-in provision. I think that is kind of important, the opt-in provision, and that making sure that municipalities have the right to issue license. So this requirement for host community agreement with municipality, I think that's important. We're seeing this play out just north of the bridge already, and they have similar provisions here, where they
really
have to
this-
issue licenses. It's very similar to what you see in Massachusetts as well.
it's really the second provision then that's causing concern in this, under the authorizing, the legislation that authorizes the sale, the costs, as you mentioned
Yes.
before, those three bullets, or four bullets.
bullets.
Yep. So is that a provision that this committee would not recommend the council to endorse?
Well, it's tricky, I guess like I'm still talking about the second sub-bullet under legislation that authorizes sale of, unless the following requirements and conditions are included. On the sub-bullet, second sub-bullet, I would agree that the city should be getting, or any municipality should be receiving funding that is commensurate with the sale of cannabis in their, within their border. But the reasons that they give of substance abuse and cost to provide care to those needing assistance, local police in terms of the first line of enforcement for underage use, impaired driving, and result in social problems, fire department and EMS agencies that are going to see calls for overdoses, and the need for significant enhancement in the drug recognition expert program to ensure local departments can adequately enforce motor vehicle. I mean, maybe on the motor vehicle aspect of this, but I feel like this previous ones were written for a drug that has presented much higher fatalities or any I guess, adverse effects that would be, greater than alcohol at this point. So I don't know how we continue to say that we want the money, but we don't agree with the reasons why we need the money. We want the money because we're the ones that are going to be licensing, enforcing the laws without, creating a situation where, we've agreed that there is some sort of,
Societal detriment.
yeah.
I think because those subsets are specifically linked to the local funding, if you have concerns about those subsets, Romanet I through 4, that you should not recommend that provision to the council,
Okay.
for the reasons you've discussed.
Can we just leave that second subset as, we'll have to deal directly with the impacts of legalization, period, and just not have anything, because there will be impacts of legalization, but it'll be more around licensing and permitting and inspections than it will be around making sure that we have additional funding for substance abuse issues.
If, again, there's a more traditional meeting of the group, what what could be authorized or recommended by this group is that we put a motion on the floor to remove those specifics, the I through 4, if that's, if that's permissible. And then if that's not permissible, then, then the issue would be whether or not we would support the provision overall.
So I would move that we remove the subsections, the 4 subsections under the bullet point that starts with legislation that legalizes the sale of cannabis must include provisions for an adequate and sustained funding. And should we not be able to remove those bullet points, that we not support that specific subheading?
All right, and just for the clarity of the motion, we will return back to that at the end of
Right.
the, end of the discussion with one motion. All right,
I'd second.
Okay.
okay, but it's not a motion because we haven't made the motion just yet. We're simply noting what we would make at the end of the discussion here.
That's fine.
Okay, moving on to finance and revenue. Are there any questions or concerns? I do have a couple points of clarification. So under the provision that talks about to lower the abatement interest rate that municipalities pay under 7617A, that's right above it's the last bullet before the NHMA positions that they oppose. That actually passed this year. So if you're a little confused, it's because it passed. It is 4%. But I guess they kept that in there because every year legislation can be introduced to change that percentage. So that actually did pass. It was 6% the year before, and now it's 4%, and it aligns exactly with the interest rate on the delinquent taxes. So it's it matches. But I just wanted to clarify that did pass last session.
Any discussions on the finance and revenue, or the, first, the property taxes and related revenues?
If I could, Your Honor, I didn't see, maybe I missed it, that NHMA was supporting restoring the amount of rooms and meals tax going back to the towns and cities.
I believe it's in another section,
Okay.
believe it or not. Yeah, I think it's later on in the policies. Because I did see it.
And we've talked about this before, but our tax base is unusual in that we have 45% or so that's commercial, and right now, a commercial building taxpayer can refuse to provide information for the income approach to appraising the building. And I know that our assessor has said we've gone to Concord in the past to try and change that without success. But, do we differ there with an HMA? And do other towns and cities that have a big commercial base like us differ? I would submit we probably do. And I think that there's probably appraisal value left on the table because we can't use the income approach, which could be used to offset our residential tax base.
And that's specifically legislation that prohibits the use of the income approach
Right.
by a taxpayer in any appeal of assessed value if the taxpayer refuses to provide such information as requested in the municipality. I'm interested, why would NHMA be supportive of that?
My recollection of the controversy of valuations is that's only if they refuse to provide such information as requested by the municipality. So I think it's like a discovery problem, particularly when you go to the Board of Land and Tax Appeals. If it's a pro se person that is legitimately representing themselves, my vague recollection in the past is there's been problems with municipalities getting supporting documentation for certain types of appraisals, rent rolls and that sort of thing. So I think the intent of this is you can't use the income approach unless you provide the information that supports that income approach. And I know our assessor has had that issue before in not necessarily appeals, but, you know, getting full documentation. That's my recollection.
Councilor Tabor, any other questions on?
No? That's it.
Now on to the state aid and non-property tax revenue.
Yes. RSA 31A refers to the rooms and meals, or no?
That's just revenue sharing. That's the one we mentioned before. That states a particular percentage of the budget for revenue sharing that I mentioned early on,
Okay.
and they repeal that regularly, which they have done. I don't know the statutory reference for the state meals and rooms, but under the opposition, under the first bullet, under opposition, it opposes any legislation that would repeal the dedicated fund to share that 30% of the state's meals and rooms tax. So in other words, you can't change that percentage like the legislature has done historically over many, many years by reducing it.
Okay.
Any questions on that? All right, on to the retirement system. Seems pretty straightforward. We'd love to get to 35%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy
We got the
days.
7.5 one time, you know,
Yeah.
from the surplus, but I was very positive. But yes, so there are no issues relative to that. Okay. And then the education funding. This is very vanilla, and the reason it
They've
is.
stayed away from
They stay
education.
away from it. And they have, the New Hampshire School Boards Association really takes position on bills relative to education funding. NHMA, because their membership is so diverse, they don't take a position on the ed funding issues pretty much ever that I can, you know, that I can recall for the SWEPT issue specifically. Any objections to anything in that category? Okay. And then energy, environment, and sustainability.
Some good ones in here. I mean, we're, as a state, really stingy on net energy metering, and that inhibits people from getting solar, and so the more we can raise that, the better off we are. And hooray for community choice and energy supply.
Yes.
There are no changes to the energy and sustainability and no comments. Okay, moving on to the water resource protection, control, and management. Any changes or comments to those policies?
Do we currently do anything that is, I mean, we can, basically they oppose anything that's unfunded from the state on the municipality?
Yeah,
Unfunded mandates, yeah.
yeah,
But
overall.
But no, reason why Portsmouth couldn't do that, doesn't speak to anything that we couldn't do, just no mandates.
Right, it's not limiting what we could do, but it is supporting, the funding of clean water and the infrastructure associated with it.
As a resident expert, Suzanne Woodland, have any opinions on the water resource protection, control, and management from a state level? She viewed these and thought of anything?
I did not run this by her, these provisions, so I'd be
It's
happy to
not
do.
like, it's not like because we put it in here, or even if they put it in there, that it happens. Right.
Correct.
Right, but there's nothing that we would find problematic in any of these.
No, in fact, I think the third bullet, the NHMA supports the regulation of emerging contaminants at appropriate, and the technical standards was one of the principles Portsmouth put forward 3 years ago to make sure they use science to evaluate contaminants. And that was actually a floor policy amendment that Portsmouth, I think, put forward many, many years ago to NHMA that was kind of woven into, at least a version of it has continued to stay woven in to these principles. No additional comments on the water resources? Okay, seeing none, moving on to solid waste management. Again, you can see here a lot of regional, you're seeing woven in here for these principles and policies, a lot more approach to regional approaches to solving problems. That's something that's arisen over the last several years. Any comments or revision to those policies? Seeing none, moving on to the housing. And again, this has come to the forefront in the last couple of years through legislation. I am certain we'll see more coming next session too. This has definitely evolved over the years.
It'd be lovely to see some municipalities' ability to mandate units
Yeah,
that
like-
fall under income restriction. We're getting close. Closer and closer.
So do we feel as though they support with, there's usually a regional approach. We think legislation which promotes a collaborative approach between the state municipalities and other key stakeholders. I guess, do we have a way to, tackle this regionally as well?
I think that this policy would encourage that approach, the collective approach between the state municipalities and other key stakeholders. I mean, I think that's attempted, by some of these changes for, through the planning. I know the Regional Planning Commission and working with other communities, and I think also housing is going to be something that needs to have a collaborative approach, given the cost of housing from one town to the next. And I think that's recognized. I think there's been more robust legislation historically to encourage that. It hasn't been as successful, but I think it's water on a rock, just like the meals and rooms. And I think that there'll be more certainly in the future, because I think, again, what one small town's ability is to do with workforce housing, if they're unable to work collaboratively and regionally, it's going to be challenging compared to
Sure.
working collectively. And this supports a collaborative approach.
Right.
If we want to create legislation, we can reach out to our representatives and try to flesh out in advance of the introduction of LSRs what that might look like, what we could envision.
Have we put forth any legislation from Portsmouth that with, the first bullet point, legislation that allows for municipalities to require the inclusion of affordable and diverse housing opportunities as part of new housing developments.
I don't recall any suggested legislation that this committee has recommended to our delegates on that issue. But
Because we've always, people always think, literally everybody in Portsmouth thinks that we can build housing and require affordable housing as part of it. I'd say almost everybody in Portsmouth. Unless you're on the council or on a land use board, you think, oh yeah, well, why don't you require housing? Well, we can only do it if there's a variance for that housing. And the variance is to build bigger and, people can pick a park or affordable
the community
units.
space, yeah,
So,
credits, yeah.
But those are, again, only for variances. We can't, by right, require 20% of any new units to be affordable in Portsmouth. And so, yeah, I guess I would like to see that come out, at least from one of our delegates. I've always been surprised, because we definitely don't have that right.
What we could do is, if this committee authorized me to do so, I think Senator Perkins Polka is someone who works in the workforce housing, and I can relay this concern and see if there's anything in the works. The dates for submission on LSRs, goes through, I think the latest the House can sign off on all LSRs is late November, and the Senate's a little bit later than that. So we certainly have time to have those discussions now before the LSRs.
Should we invite them in to have a
I have a
discussion?
meeting with the delegates, schedule one.
Why don't we wait until after the primary?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we will, I guess,
Yeah.
by
By
primary
Back of
on
meetings.
Tuesday.
Yeah, by the fact that it's next week.
There's another housing provision I had a question on, but it's actually under land use. But it's clearly a housing provision.
Okay, so do you want any more questions on the housing?
I mean, I think the legislation that erodes local control over the land use decisions, we're never going to, it's a big one. I agreed with Martha Flo Clark that we should have ADUs, even though that eroded local control, but I don't think we will ever have, I think anything that will be successful with the NHMA will be through the lens of local control.
And
Meaning the only way we will get more conservatives or Republicans and Democrats to agree on something is if it's something that can be pitched as a local control.
As an opt-in or opt-out.
And that's why, under land use, I was going to argue that we need to drop one of the opposition items. New state mandates requiring municipalities to allow specific types of housing. I don't know that we'd actually oppose a new state mandate requiring municipalities to allow ADUs.
Right.
So I don't.
we did oppose short-term
Airbnb.
rentals in
Yeah.
every residential
Right.
unit or district.
Right, but that's different than ADUs. So like if it came up, if we had a new, at the state level, if we had a proposition to require ADUs, I don't know, I think that would benefit us.
But I think on the flip side is that if we had a state proposition that required us to allow Airbnbs, we would oppose
It's
that.
different, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is maybe
Just
we shouldn't
remove that.
have that statement in there because we already have a statement about opposing, allowing municipalities to regulate short-term rentals, is what we support. But I don't know that we would always oppose changes to allow specific types of housing. I don't know that Portsmouth would actually oppose, I don't know where everyone else stands, but I don't know that Portsmouth would actually oppose changes to single-family, from single-family to multifamily throughout either, right? So this is the.
For example, there was a bill last session that would have allowed every single-family resident to be converted to 4 units.
To upzone it.
And,
Right.
I don't know that there's been uniform support for that in the city of Portsmouth. And if this was taken out, then it would prohibit NHMA from, I think, fighting for some of those statewide zoning changes that are outside of ADUs, such as four units by right for every single-family residence.
I don't know that, I think there's probably a lot of people in Portsmouth that think that's reasonable. So that's the challenge here, is that I don't think that this fits our position either, that we oppose any statewide changes. Because the challenge right now we have is the state, in some cases, is in better position to make some of these changes than we are at the local level.
I can summarize quickly some of the statewide zoning changes that were opposed by NHMA that on different types of issues for bills. And I just think for purposes of discussion, it might be worth kind of going down that little laundry list, which I have here, I promise. So there were statewide zoning amendments for allowing short-term rentals everywhere, that was killed. Allowing tiny houses everywhere, that was killed. A 10,000 square foot minimum lot size, that was killed. Maximum of one parking space per dwelling unit, that was killed. Allowing fourplexes where public water, as long as you had public water and sewer, that was killed. And limiting, and anyway, so those were the type, I think when we're talking about statewide zoning changes, we are talking about when the state says, you gotta, right, you gotta do X, you gotta do Y, and it basically amends the zoning ordinances throughout the state. So those are the types of bills that NHMA did oppose and that were killed, that would definitely change our zoning and impact our residential, particularly our residential neighborhoods. And there's two sides of, supporting or opposing
Right.
those changes, but it's important to note that that's what NHMA did on some of those particular positions.
I guess I would say the reason why the Airbnb was killed, it wasn't because Airbnb, there was a solid view on Airbnb or not. I think there was enough support that it had a negative effect on housing stock, but I also think there was much in the vein of the state shall not, describe what a town shall do. I think that's mostly the feel of Concord when it comes to zoning. Now, the opposite is that I feel like communities like Portsmouth, Kevin's going to get very angry at me for not talking. A community like Portsmouth should have more levers when it deals with some of our neighbors that we do support in many ways, through our schools, through our wastewater treatment, through our water. But, right now we have no, ability to say, Rye, we can charge you more for wastewater and, water and, how much we're going to cost to educate your kids in our high schools without, if you don't change your zoning. So I guess I would like more flexibility within municipalities to solve this on our own than necessarily saying the state is going to, because I'm not confident that that's going to pass anything in Concord. Now, we could disagree with it, but we also did use it from the Airbnb standpoint of saying this is a statewide issue, and or this is not a statewide issue, this should be argued locally. But somebody will very quickly turn around and say, well, we don't want maximum lot sizes, or we want to reduce, there's statewide zoning that require, higher, lot sizes that we would also probably oppose. But I don't know, well, one, I would back up from the State House, and I don't think anything like that would change. And then two, whether or not we oppose it now from the NHMA, the NHMA is not going to change their view. So we could protest that quite easily and say we don't support state mandates that require that, and I'd be fine to do that, but it's not something that I believe there's a strong support, because the majority of the NHMA is the towns, they don't look at it as how much, NHMA is funded, by the cities, which is, I think, a majority of the funding comes from the cities for that organization, but they don't treat it as such. Get 5 minutes, I think, before we wrap up.
Mike, it's up in the planning conference room.
Oh, planning conference room.
Looking for cemetery committee? Yeah, planning conference room, third floor.
I guess I just have questions around that. I don't know that I want the New Hampshire Municipal Association lobbying on our behalf against some of these provisions that they actually lobbied against last year. Like, I really don't have a problem with a maximum of 1 parking space required per dwelling. And so there's some of these provisions in Portsmouth. I mean, I think that that's something that we're looking at when it comes to climate change and, starting to reduce the number of cars that are required in the city. We're talking about increasing housing and having multi-family housing in neighborhoods that maybe we didn't before. Tiny houses, I think, are not necessarily a bad thing when you have a major housing problem, and so I'm just saying that I don't necessarily want, on our behalf, the New Hampshire Municipal Association lobbying against some of the things that they will lobby against at a statewide level. Because these are things we can't accomplish here because we can't change the zoning here to allow some of these things because they're not allowed in the statewide zoning. Correct?
So they're not, well, it's not, so like the ADU, for example, is the state came down and said that you shall be required to allow this type of housing here.
Right.
There was no reason why somebody couldn't allow that housing before, but many municipalities did not do that because they chose not to. And then even now, I think there's some, whether or not they're fully living up to the spirit of that law is not. I mean, I guess I somewhat part of me, it's hard for me in that I want to be able to have local control over the things that the properties that we raise or the revenues that we raise, and what we can require of partners in the immediate region. It's difficult for me to also then say, well, unless it's something I want, then the state can tell you whatever you should do. And so I guess that's why I wouldn't be supportive of repealing that, even if there would be things that I would be disagreeing with. But we've gone against the NHMA before and spoken out against things that we feel strongly about. So I'm happy to pull it as well, and I think that, but I don't think that it's. I think that the way that we, I guess, fundamentally, I think that the way that we're going to solve this is figuring out how we incentivize communities to do it rather than the state telling communities how they're going to do it. And I think that is going to, I think it's going to be a tough hill to climb, and then, communities have to take into account the cost of, they are not truly bearing the cost of, Rye or Greenland don't truly bear the cost of, education for kids, or any number of things that, living next to a city like Portsmouth provides them. But I don't know if the state telling them that they have to do it is going to work as much as Portsmouth incentivizing them, for one way or the other to do it. But again, I'm happy to strike it, and I would support it if we did. But I'm not convinced that that's the way that we're going to get the outcome that I think we collectively desire here.
Could I add a point to your concerns? One of the things we could do at the next meeting is look at our legislative principles on housing and look to see if we want to edit that. And that way, this committee can recommend to the council or, a change in our policy. And therefore, regardless of NHMA's position on this, we would be active in opposing or, supporting whatever that new principle would reflect. So that's another way that this committee could be a little more supportive of change, perhaps, in housing, and do it that way.
Land use boards that we have are local. And we delegate to them the balance between the public interest and the private interest. And the more that our zoning can reflect that balance of public interest versus private interest for Portsmouth, I think the better it generally will be. For example, the upzoning to 4 units in every house would have a tremendous impact in a city like ours. That, whichever side of it you're on, shouldn't that be debated locally as opposed to through a state mandate? I think if the state mandates land use controls like that, they're one size fits all for every town. So I think there's value in having us adjudicate the balance between what's right for the public interest and versus the property owner as close to local as we can. That's just how I feel about it.
And I'm not convinced that, is for you, I think you would go on the record saying it's a good idea to be able to allow that, but I'm not sure that would pass in Portsmouth. I would be surprised, to be quite honest, if everybody supported, I'm thinking of areas where parking is at a premium, where there would be as soon as we have self-parking cars, all of our problems will be new problems. But I have a hard time thinking that, I guess I would like to focus all of these are, I'd like to be able to lead by example as much as we can in Portsmouth and use that and get more tools to be able to help other communities see in our surrounding vicinity what what good looks like and why they should be incentivized to be good. I would say the ADU was a good idea, and it created an opportunity, but I don't, Martha Full Clark still supported that, and that was her bill out of Portsmouth, and it happened because of her leadership, and we, the NHMA, didn't support it. So I think that there's opportunity when there's a good bill to be supportive of that, and I don't think, we can take this off, but I worry more about, the one bill where there might be, somebody that is looking to be more restrictive than we would want to be, and then we would be on the other side of that. So the status quo seems okay for me at the moment.
I think I'm more concerned about the other side where people, where we're more limited than we want to be.
Sure.
So where we try to change zoning to allow for things, and then we're sued in the state, it's not in the RSA. So we have more of a challenge because that is not currently allowed at the state
Sure.
level and state level zoning, whereas we want to allow something in Portsmouth. And we lose because it's not allowed at the state level. That's what I'm more concerned about rather than
And what would be an example of that?
tiny houses is kind of a good example of that.
Are tiny houses not allowed per state zoning?
I don't think it's in the zoning code I don't think it is it, for?
I think I think it is defined in our building code. What
Our
that
building.
definition is, I can't tell you, but
Yeah,
I do
but
know
not-
it's come up in conversations relative to the definition in our building code.
Okay, so we have it in our building code, but if somebody were to bring a tiny house that was self-supporting into somebody's backyard and call it an ADU, do you see what I'm saying? Then, and we end up with a challenge. I'm worried about, more about, we are governed by a set of RSAs that ultimately define what is allowable and what's not allowable. We're not home ruled. So if something is not in the RSA as being allowed or allowable, I guess that's where I'm concerned. Then, and we try to do it at a local level, and then we're limited because, somebody sues and we can't do it. So that's kind of where I am. I mean, it's just me.
I think,
Sorry.
if I may, I think when you are talking about tiny homes as ADUs, I think we're covering that in the in some of the work in the land use through land use committee on ADUs,
Right.
through of our policies and what can be considered, depending on sizing, detachment, all of that stuff. So I do think there are municipal, checkpoints that would protect us against something like that and or allow something like that based on our own ADU policies within the municipality.
So just and another point, the laws requiring, it was, there's, allowing ADUs is different than requiring ADUs. And so, we are a subdivision of the state. Dillon's rules apply, and we can't do things that are not specifically stated in the RSAs. But that doesn't mean that, I think it would be easier to potentially change something on the state level, like on the RSA, where, like, Principle 1, where municipalities can require 20%. I think if that was changed to be must require 20%, I think that would be a harder sell for New Hampshire to support a bill like that than it would be a may require. And I think the new state mandates requiring municipalities to allow specific types of housing speak to the have to have instead of may have. And so I wouldn't have the concern. Again, I still think that there is a, I think that there's a definite need for, like, anybody watching the recording, I'm sorry for picking on Rye, but there's a definite need for places that are, that have more land and, could be connected to water and sewer that are close to municipalities to build more. But I might be wrong about this, but I feel strongly that people have to, are governed by the government works by the consent of the governed. I feel like they have to be somewhat incentivized themselves to believe that this is in their best interest, or else we will find, I think the ADUs were something that was able to pass because it was such a small thing. But, for a major thing to pass, I worry about the backlash of people, talking about paving paradise and putting up a parking lot type situations where they would be required to do something like that. But again, I'd be happy to, I like the idea, but I do worry about what we would be losing by, going into the mandate world, where I think Portsmouth is going to do its best work for affordable housing by leading by example of what can happen and what, and incentivize our communities around us to potentially take more bold action that they are taking at the moment. All right.
Okay.
So we will. And then the other all statewide land use mandates. So we can think about it and come back when we make our motions at the end. Information technology, communications, and cybersecurity. Any questions on? The only thing that I thought of in this was there didn't seem to be much on the procurement side of this, and I know we've run into issues with, like, the state, specifically it was Office 365 in terms of, like, not being able to, like, procure the correct software, but I don't I'm not that up to, I can't remember exactly what Suzanne's issue with when she was trying to buy Office 365.
Nor do I. I wouldn't know what to recommend to potentially consider her. We can coordinate with her and report back to the
And that
subcommittee.
could be something we could work with our delegates at our next meeting
Sure.
to try to flush that out for an issue in the next session. Any other comments on the IT section? No? Last page. Transportation?
No questions on this?
Question.
No? Okay. Last subject, economic development, review, recovery, and vitality. Seeing no comments? Okay. I think the two issues that were flagged by the group were substance use prevention and response relative to an amendment to Romanet I through 4 relative to the local funding. And the other issue flagged and discussed by the group was the most recent discussion on the positions that NHMA opposes regarding land use.
I think we should deal with these separately because I don't think that everybody's on the same page. Like, I think everybody's on the same page on one, but not on the other.
Well, so these would be, these all, I'm just trying to think of the final goal of these are to be recommended, they have to be approved by the council?
Yes.
On the 19th before
Yes.
the, okay, so,
So it would be the recommendation would be to not adopt, that provision.
That provision.
Well, or the recommendation would be move to remove at the meeting, and if not, not vote to approve that particular section on the specifications regarding the local funding.
okay. I'm just trying to think of like the easiest way to have this be, so Counselor Cook, would you rather us have the discussion and make the recommendation out of the subcommittee? Or would you rather have the discussion at the council meeting?
I think I would leave it. I think I'm the only person here that feels that way about that provision. So
It could be.
with that said, I mean, I think that,
Bring it up at the council meeting.
or not bring it up at the council meeting. Because if I'm the only one here of 4, I can do the math on that, when we get to the council level. Like, I doubt that that's going anywhere. So, but I think that we do need to discuss the provisions of the other section.
So I'm trying to get to a point where we can all agree on something here when it comes to land use. So your specific point is that, so are you taking both new state mandates requiring municipalities to allow specific types of housing and all other statewide land use mandates that the NMHA would oppose?
Oh, no, just the second provision, new state mandates requiring municipalities to allow specific types of housing. Just because I think that in some cases it would be nice to have a state level mandate. But that's me.
Okay, but I'm,
It's just my view.
and the view is the requirement to have a type of housing where it doesn't otherwise exist superseding the town's own zoning for that. Okay.
And this could just be that, honestly, we deal with this a lot. like questions, legal questions and governance related to, well, if there's not enabling legislation at the state level, then you can't do it. And so that's why I'm looking at it through that lens. I think that if there's not enabling legislation, you can't do it. Plus, I'm also looking at through it the lens of sometimes you need the state to have mandates for certain things to move forward.
Sure.
Because you will never get support from some of our neighbors for
Right.
certain.
But I would say the first, I guess I want to be, hopefully I can convince you of the first part is not this. The enabling legislation is not the
No.
mandate of requiring it. And-
Right,
And it
exactly.
does come up a lot, because it comes up in the first principle of requiring, oh, if we were to require, we need affordable housing, we need enabling state legislation that we currently don't have.
Right.
But the second point is, if we're going to require that, and again, I would, we can save our, I think the discussion is a good one, but I would await a motion and a second, and I would second it for purposes of discussion if we, I guess I can't second it. 'cause I'm sure.
I think I'm going to leave it. I think I'm the only person who has this view. So it's okay.
Okay.
It's okay. I mean, I'm good with leaving that alone.
And back on to the,
We all do it sometimes.
back onto the cannabis, is that specifically cannabis, or where does it fall under, drug use, or?
Substance abuse prevention and
Substance.
response.
Such a weird place to have it,
Right.
but substance use, I guess, I mean, there's nothing else, describing, where is that larger one under, it's the general administration, okay, but, and I would have made a motion to amend the third bullet point, the second sub-bullet, removing Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and striking for items such as the following, and then Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is that correct?
So moved, yes.
Second,
Okay. Any discussion on that?
I think the previous discussion
Yeah. All
covered.
right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
And then a motion to recommend approval of the rest of the,
Yeah, a motion to recommend,
Is that at the beginning, before we discussed?
I don't think we did a motion to approve everything.
Okay.
no, a motion to.
All the others except for what was,
Yeah, a motion to approve,
or recommend.
recommend the legislative principles
As amended.
as amended, but I want some language in there that our legislative principles supersede these. Does that make sense? Contingent upon not conflicting with our own legislative principles.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Okay.
So the motion is to approve all the 2023-24 proposed legislative policy positions as amended, contingent upon not conflicting with our own legislative principles. Is that the motion?
Yeah, I would just change it to contingent upon conforming with,
Conforming
The
with-
city's legislative principles.
Conforming with the city's legislative principles.
So moved?
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Right.
And that's it. We don't typically have public comment here, but we have somebody in the audience, so I'd open up the meeting to public comment if you'd like to introduce yourself, Jeff.
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy to.
If you just sit up
Come
at the microphone.
Thanks.
My name's Jeff Konvalski. I'm a business representative with the Carpenters Union. I've had the pleasure to speak with some folks from Portsmouth, City Manager Conrad, Mayor McEachern. It's been great to hear the framework that you folks have laid out here this evening, because there are specific issues that my organization brings to municipalities regarding, construction work in our communities. And, I'm new to the state, so I'm still learning, and this helps. Some of the issues that we like to bring to the forefront to our communities are the issues of wage theft in the construction industry. There are recent studies from Berkeley citing 39% of construction workers across the country using some sort of public assistance to meet their families' end needs. And in the competitive industry of construction, what we see is kind of a low bid situation where you tend to get a race to the bottom dynamic, and certain contractors are abusing that dynamic. So learning about how the different municipalities in the state operate is going to be helpful to me to be able to, we have boilerplate language with wage theft ordinances, responsible employer languages that certainly can be circulated. However, I'm in touch with folks at the my organization now to try to craft something more specific for folks to be able to take a look at, and I hope that you folks will when that happens.
Thank you, Jeff. It's
yeah.
great to meet you. Appreciate you listening to our discussion here
No,
today.
it was very insightful, and I appreciate your folks' work.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Jeff, how do I spell your last name again? For the minutes?
G-R-I-N as in Nancy, V as in Valerie, A-L-S-K-Y.
And the organization again?
I have Jeff's.
Oh, you have it. Okay, never mind.
Thank you.
And then, thank you so much.
All right. Now, if there's no new business,
There was a discussion of legislative issues of interest for the
Oh.
city of Portsmouth for the next session, but it sounds like we're going to schedule
I
another
think we'll
session with our
schedule a
delegates.
discussion with the larger or the delegation, and do that obviously after the primary, and look to have ideas for them and any asks there, and also to hear of their priorities. I saw David, Representative Muse, hosting some of them, but look forward to that. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Wait a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, guys.